Hello everyone, 大家好, and welcome back to Bitesize Mandarin. This is lesson 3 and it's based on the study article for the week of September 25th. So let's plunge headlong into the lesson by looking at this sentence from paragraph 2 of the article. 基督徒既不会太严格，又不会太随便. Christians will neither be excessively rigid nor overly permissive. And we're looking at this grammar structure, 既又, which is a correlative. A correlative is simply a pair of words that work together to perform a function. So, for example, in this sentence, he is both kind and generous. The word both and the word and form a correlative to inform us that those two adjectives apply to the man in this sentence. And likewise, in this sentence, he is neither cruel nor selfish. The words neither and nor form a correlative and inform us that none of those two adjectives apply to the man in this sentence. Now, the great thing about 既又 is that it encompasses both of those correlatives, which means that depending on the context, 既又 can mean both and, or it can mean neither nor. So how does this actually work? Well, consider this what we could call a positive sentence. 他既仁慈又慷慨. He's both kind and generous. Now, this is positive not because it says nice things about the person, but rather because it's written in the affirmative, in that it affirms that this person is both of those adjectives. So in a positive sentence, 既又 functions as both and. Now, if we were to say he is both nasty and mean, then grammatically this would be a positive sentence written in the affirmative, and 既又 would also mean both and. Now, what about neither nor? Well, have a look at this sentence. 他既不残忍，又不自私. He's neither cruel nor selfish. So this sentence is written in the negative in that it negates both of these adjectives. 不残忍, 不自私. And so in these instances, 既又 functions as neither nor. So that's the case with adjectives, but it also applies to nouns, like in this sentence. 社交媒体既有优点，又有缺点. Social media has both advantages and disadvantages. So, 优点 and 缺点 are the nouns here, and 既又 functions as both and to inform us that social media has both of those things. So notice that because we are using nouns, we must also use 有, which means to have. 有优点，有缺点. And conversely, when we're using nouns in the negative, we use 没有 or 没, and 既又 functions as neither nor, like in this sentence here. 我们的家既没有电，又没有水. We could also say 我们的家既没电，又没水. We have neither electricity nor water at home. So far, we've seen how 既又 works with adjectives and nouns, but let's take a look at how it works with whole phrases. Like in this sentence here, back to the sentence from paragraph 2. 基督徒既不会太严格，又不会太随便. In the English, I paraphrased it slightly to read, Christians will neither be excessively rigid nor overly permissive. But the actual sentence from the English study article reads, Christians will not be excessively rigid or overly permissive. So this is really just a variation of neither nor and is also covered by 既又. Now in that same paragraph, there is another 既又 sentence. 一个基督徒既要坚定不移，又要灵活变通. A Christian must be both steadfast and flexible. Now we can break this down to get one last detailed look at how 既又 functions as a correlative. So what we really have is two separate phrases. The first one, 一个基督徒要坚定不移. A Christian must be steadfast. And phrase two, 一个基督徒要灵活变通. A Christian must be flexible. Now, what 既又 does is tie those two phrases together. 一个基督徒既要坚定不移，又要灵活变通. A Christian must be both steadfast and flexible. So to recap, 既又 is a correlative, a pair that works together to function in the case of an affirmative sentence as both and in the case of a negative sentence, 既又 functions as neither nor, not or. Now let's go back to the main article and go on down to paragraph 9, where we see this sentence. 他还会用奸计来削弱我们的决心. He also uses crafty acts to weaken our resolve. And so we're looking at this structure here, 用来. Now at first glance, this might seem to be a correlative like 既又, but it's actually a split verb. So the base verb is 用来, which means to be used for, or X is used for or to Y, where X is some kind of noun and Y is some kind of purpose. And the split verb 用 X 来 Y is use X for Y. So again, X is some kind of noun and Y is some kind of purpose. Now it might help to look at them in a couple of sentences. 这个锅是用来做饭的. This pot is used for cooking. So here, X, the pot, is used for Y, cooking. But look at what happens when we split the verb. 他用这个锅来做饭. He used this pot for cooking. Now it's use X, the pot, for Y, the cooking. Now let's explore this point further in this random but totally natural conversation. 好，我用这块红布来洗碗. Okay, I'll use this red cloth to wash the dishes. 不行，红布是用来清洁洗手间的. No, the red cloth is used for cleaning the toilet. 那我用什么好? So what should I use then? 黄布可以用来洗碗. The yellow cloth can be used to wash the dishes. So the first sentence really answers the question, which noun am I going to use and for what purpose? Whereas the second sentence answers the question, what is the designated purpose of the noun? It's used for cleaning the toilet. And the last sentence could be an answer to the question, which noun can be used for the designated purpose? So as with anything, it's good to see 用来 in different example sentences. So here are a few more. 耶稣用比喻来强调这一点. Jesus used an illustration to emphasize this point. 什么比喻可以用来解释赎价? What illustration can be used to explain the ransom? 祷告和聚会都是耶和华用来安慰我们的方式. Prayer and meetings are both ways Jehovah uses to comfort us. 耶和华用祷告和聚会来安慰我们. Jehovah uses prayer and meetings to comfort us. 我休息的时间是用来练习吉他的. My spare time is used for practicing the guitar. 我用休息的时间来练习吉他. I use my spare time to practice the guitar. So there are a few examples. Now if you go back to paragraph 9, just as an additional point, the sentence in Chinese matches the English almost word for word, but can you spot the exception? Let's go through it one by one. 他还用奸计来削弱我们的决心. So you probably noticed that 会 is the only word which is not translated into English. So we know 会 means will. But why is it that it wasn't translated across? Or why is it sometimes translated and other times not? Well, if someone were to ask us how we normally get to work, for example, we might respond, sometimes I'll go by car, sometimes I'll go by bus. But in this context, although we're using the word will, we're not actually referring to the future. So this is not the future will, but rather we're talking about something we do in general as a matter of routine, so that we could take out the word will and the sentence would mean exactly the same thing. And so it's the same principle here. 他还会用奸计来削弱我们的决心. In this sentence, it's not translated across. He also uses crafty acts. But the sentence could be rendered, he will also use crafty acts, without any change in meaning. So to recap the main point, 用来 means X is or is to be used for to Y. And we can split that verb, 用 X 来 Y. And this would mean use X for or to Y. Now let's go back to the main article for one last point. And this time it's in paragraph 7. And we have this sentence. 他会想方设法削弱我们的决心. He will try to weaken our resolve. Now, just as a quick vocab side point, in the last lesson, we briefly mentioned how 加强 means to strengthen. For example, 加强我们的信心, strengthen our faith. Now here, what we see is the opposite. 削弱, weaken. So we can 削弱我们的决心, weaken our resolve. We could also 加强我们的决心, strengthen our resolve. A person can 加强自己跟上帝的关系, strengthen one's relationship with God. Or something could 削弱自己跟上帝的关系, weaken our relationship with God. So that was just a brief vocab detour, but now back to the main point. 想方设法, this delicious idiom. So what does it mean? 想 means think of, 方 ways, 设 try, and 法 also means ways. So as a four-word idiom, 想方设法 means try every means and do everything possible. So back in this sentence, 他会想方设法削弱我们的决心. He will try to weaken our resolve. If we were to translate that more literally into English, it would be, he will try everything to weaken our resolve. Now, because of the nature of this sentence, it might seem like 想方设法 has negative connotations, but it's actually neutral, in that the context determines whether 想方设法 is good or bad. For example, in this sentence, 耶和华的组织会想方设法提供这些食物. Jehovah's organization would do everything possible to provide this food. Here, 想方设法 is definitely a good thing. Here's another example of how it's a bad thing. 耶稣的敌人想方设法逮捕他. Jesus' enemies tried to have him arrested. So here, 想方设法 is used negatively. They tried everything they could to have him arrested. It can also be neutral. 我们的公司正在想方设法获得新客户. Our company is doing everything they can to get new customers. So isn't it amazing how flexible just that one single idiom is? And idioms are absolutely fantastic, so rich in meaning. But there is one problem. Idioms can sometimes come across as quite intimidating. So we can explore the problem this way. We can think back to before we knew anything about Chinese Mandarin, and the only Chinese we knew was perhaps chicken chow mein and chips on a Friday evening. Now, if someone had asked us back then, how do you say brothers and sisters in Mandarin, as in Christian brothers and sisters? Now, back then, of course, we wouldn't have had a clue, but now what comes to mind automatically is 弟兄姐妹. If someone had said, how do you say help in Mandarin? Such a simple word, but at one point, we didn't know how to say it. And now we know it's 帮助. There was a time when we didn't know how to say us in Mandarin. Now, of course, we know that it's 我们. So we might consider this to be a pretty straightforward sentence. But if 10 minutes ago someone had asked us, well, how do you say the brothers and sisters do everything in their power to help us? Maybe we could have come up with something, but maybe nothing would have come to mind. But now we know that at least one way to say do everything in one's power is 想方设法. So in a sense, 想方设法 is no different to any of the other words in this sentence, in that at one point we didn't know those words, then we learned them, and now we use them all the time. Now we might argue that the other words are simple in comparison to 想方设法, but let's just think about some of the mental hurdles that we've had to overcome in order to use these words properly. For example, at one point, it would have seemed odd to us that there is no word for the in Chinese, but now our minds have accepted it. So the student said is simply 学生说. And have you ever noticed how in English we say brothers and sisters, but in Chinese we normally just say 弟兄姐妹. Rarely do we say 弟兄和姐妹. And that's because those two words are so closely associated that we can drop the 和, much like mom and dad in Mandarin is mama papa. And do you remember the novelty of learning how 我们 not only means us, but also we? 上帝爱我们, God loves us. 我们爱上帝, we love God. Remember learning how if you stick a 的 on a 我们, it becomes our. For example, 我们的上帝, our God. Now, when we say 我们的上帝, how often do we think to ourselves, so what's going on here is I'm using the possessive particle? We don't, we just say it. And how often do we think 我们 is either we or us, depending on whether it's in the subject or object position within a given sentence? Now, maybe at one stage we might have learned all of that, but now it doesn't even occur to us that that is what's happening. We just say it. And really, it's the same with idioms. So we've learned that 想方设法 is indeed a four-word idiom, but going forward, we could just think of it as simply one way to say do everything in one's power, or try every means, do everything possible. Another reason to learn and use idioms is that often they can be a shortcut, a quicker way to express an idea. For example, you may have noticed that hidden in plain sight within 想方设法 is the word 方法. And if we pleco that, we see that it means method, way, or means. And just look at this example usage here. 用各种方法 in all sorts of ways, by every means. So that means then that this sentence 弟兄姐妹想方设法帮助我们 could also be rendered as 弟兄姐妹用各种方法来帮助我们, which is absolutely fantastic. Now we have two ways to say do everything in one's power, a bit of variety, but 想方设法 is quicker. So another reason to learn and use idioms is for their expediency. So 想方设法 is an idiom meaning try every means and do everything possible. And just to really drive the point home, we don't need to be intimidated by idioms. This grid of grammar words might seem intimidating, but consider this sentence. 我读了一本非常好的书. I read a very good book. Now, to someone who's been learning Chinese for some time, this could be considered a fairly standard sentence. But if we were to say this sentence out loud, would our brain be thinking of which part of the grammar grid to the left each word belongs to, like this? 我读了一本非常好的书. So we can see that even though there are many grammar elements to this sentence, we don't think of any of that. Instead, we just say it. And that's the way we can think of idioms, to learn them and just use them. So, in this lesson, we've looked at how to say both A and B and neither A nor B using ji, yo. We've learned how to say use X to accomplish Y using 用来, and the idiom 想方设法, which means to try every means. In the next lesson, we'll learn how to say never did, never does, never will do, within it, among them, and two different ways to say unexpected. See you next time.